Hello and welcome to Bonus Action Dash. My name is Jaren and this is part one of a three-part mini crash course on how to use Roll20 to run D&D style games. Now the intent here is not to make a full-on comprehensive guide into every feature that Roll20 has, but more or less to give you the tools that you'll need to get up and running really quickly and start running games. This is the guide that I wish I would have had when I started running about 3 years ago on Roll20. So to jump right into this, in this first video, we're going to cover creating some tokens and some maps, and maybe talk a little bit about the player journal. Basically everything that you'd need to start running some encounters. In the second video, we're going to make those maps a little bit nicer and we'll add dynamic lighting. And in the third video, we'll talk a little bit about the Roll20 jukebox and we'll start adding music to our pages. So to back out of this, I guess if we were to start right from scratch and we're to exit Roll20 and go to the homepage here, we do need to have an account registered. We're going to see all of the games here. Likely you're going to create a new game, and at the new game creation screen, you'll have a couple of options. This is the one and only spot that you're going to see where you can add a module to a campaign. So for example, if you have purchased a module and want to add it to your game, this is where you're going to do it. This is the one and only space to do it. You can't create a game and then later on decide to add a module. I've already done this. I've already got this all set up. No matter if you're doing this by making a module or by using a module or creating your own custom stuff, I think the content in this video series is going to be helpful. So let's go back and I will load up the tutorial here. Now, a couple things to note. I'm using Firefox just in case things look a little bit different for you. I'm using Firefox, and I'm also using a plugin called VTT Enhancement Suite. It's a Firefox plugin. They might have it for Chrome too, I don't know. It does a lot of things. Mostly what I use it for is for the visual quality of life improvements. It's going to lay out your pages in a lot nicer way and give you some visual reminders as to where things are located. So that's the other thing, the other disclaimer in case things look a little different for you. So you've got your account registered. You've got the plugin if you so choose to use that. Highly recommend it. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to recommend creating a new page and calling it tokens. I've already done this, so I don't have to do that. This little tab up here at the top, page toolbar, is how we're going to be navigating in between the pages that we create. I can click create new page up at the top here. If I click on the new page that I've made, it will take me there. If I want to move my players there, that's indicated by this red ribbon. It's a simple click and drag, and my players are going to go wherever I drag this ribbon. It doesn't have to be the same place that I'm looking at, which is super nice because that means while they're looking at something else, I can be getting the combat and counter map ready to go. So I'm going to leave this where it is, and we'll go over to the tokens map that I just made. As you can see, by default, it comes with a grid. If I wanted to go into the page settings, I do that on this page tab here, and I click the gear icon. I can change the size here. I can change the background color, change any of the grid settings. This doesn't have to be a 5-foot grid. For example, if you're making a bigger map, maybe you want a 10-foot grid squares, or you want to make a world map and we're not doing 5 feet or 10 feet, but we're doing miles. And this is kind of how you would change that. You don't have to use squares. We can change this to hexes if we wanted to, but I'm going to leave it as squares. And then lastly, we can change the grid color. So if I wanted something a little darker, I could do that here as well. We can mess with the grid opacity, make it real dark. I don't really like that look, so let's go back. And then lastly, we can completely turn off the grid if we don't want to use that. Let's leave it on for now and come back to this setting. Also, by the way, we'll touch on this in the next video. This is where you go and do all your fancy dynamic lighting settings. This is in the page settings. Once again, this little gear icon on this tab. Now there are a number of ways to make tokens. If you've got any, photo editing software, you can make a token. I think the key for tokens is you want to have something that's rounded and has a transparent background. If you're like me and don't really have those image editing skills, a tool that I use, I know there's a lot of free token creators online. I use this thing called Token Stamp. just Google search for it or copy this link here. It's super easy and intuitive. All you need to do is find an image that you want to use as a token, drag it in, and you can move it all around, resize it, do what you want. It's got a bunch of cool border options. Up here on the top left, you can make all sorts of cool borders. And then you just need to right click and save this image here. Once we've got that, where am I? I think I navigated to the wrong page here. I have too many things open at once. Let's close this up. Let's go back over to the token page. And now we just need to drag and drop into our page here. Boom, it looks perfect. It's obviously way too big. So let's just resize this really quickly and we are ready to go. Now, by default, it's going to place whatever you drug into the page. It's going to put it on your current layer. Roll20 operates on a system of layers. It's going to put that token on whatever your current layer is. We can see those layers on this toolbar off to the left. This second tool here is your layer selector. It's not, I can't click this cube and select it, but I can move in between these different layers here. So we've got map and background, objects and tokens, GM info overlay, and dynamic lighting. We were on objects and tokens by default, and that's where the token was placed. Now, a little bit of explanation before I continue. Objects and tokens, almost exclusively, this is going to be your player character tokens and your NPC tokens. It's what your players are going to be able to interact with as soon as you give them permission. Map and background is exactly what it says. It's where you're going to put your combat encounter maps or your whatever you're using as a map. Maybe it's just a map card that you want to give for like an environmental cue. And then we've got GM info overlay. This is a place where you can write notes to yourself, whether it's a reminder of secret doors and traps, or the DC to notice illusory terrain. Or oftentimes if you're using a module, you'll see on the big dungeon map, it's got these big bubbles that are, it's got a letter and a number, like this is room A1, this is A2. And then you go to the text and it's got the corresponding text that describes room A1 and A2. This is where those things are going to exist. Your players can't see them. It's just information for you, the dungeon master. And then lastly, the fourth layer is the dynamic lighting layer, which is where you do all your fancy behind the scenes stuff to make lighting all cool and interesting. We're going to talk about this layer, the objects and tokens layer for now. We have our token drug in and it's ready to be used. If we double click on it, it brings up this window. It's just a window, and we can do all sorts of stuff with it. We can put a nameplate on it if we want to. So let's give this character token a name of Gwendrel. This was played by a player in my previous Frost Maiden campaign, and we can also, this is where we're going to change who it's controlled by. As long as you have players registered into your campaign, their name's going to populate in here. And so this is where you give those permissions. So if your players are going, hey, I see my token, but I can't move it, it's probably because you forgot to change the permission here. We also have some kind of useful values off to the right. We can use these to keep track of hit points, for example. And I think best I could figure out, as long as these values are numerical values, they should display something. So for example, if I said 60 out of 60, now it's going to display here and show 60. And it even comes with a little health bar at the top. So if I, decrease this to 40, then the health bar decreases. I think as long as it starts with a number, it will display something. So for example, if I wanted to use the second value and say armor class of 16, I can't say 16, nothing's going to show. It'll show as a number over here, but it's not going to show a bar. If you're cool with that, that's fine. If I wanted to say, if 16 out of 16 didn't make sense, what I could do is say 0 AC, and then it will at least display something. It's not going to make any sense. We're not using it for its numerical value, but as long as it starts with the number, I can't say 16 AC because AC isn't a number. So I think that's how that works. Now, I know that you can also assign these attributes to correspond to Roll20 character sheets. If that's something that you've chosen to do, there are Roll20 character sheets built into the app. You can assign these and correspond these values. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. And I'm pretty sure most people these days are using D&D Beyond to keep track of their character sheet anyways. We've also got a spot to write notes for ourselves if we want to write, specific token notes. It doesn't have to be your character tokens, could be NPC tokens. And then this is also where we set specific token dynamic lighting settings. So down the road, if your characters are like, hey, I can control my token, but I can't see anything, it's probably because you forgot to turn on dynamic lighting. So that's about that for token creation. You can also mess around with auras. So maybe your character is a cleric and they've set up some aura so that everybody gets healing if they're within a certain range. This is where you're going to change that. And as long as I think you can change for each aura, if you want to give that player character permissions to edit it as well, you can do that here too. So you can change this to see and edit, or you can turn it off, and then it's only visible to you, the dungeon master. That's where this is changed. I think that should do it for token creation. And I'm going to recommend as a best practice that you create a page called tokens, and you keep all of your tokens on this one page, all of your player character tokens, your NPC tokens. So that way you set these up one time, you set up the dynamic lighting and all the other stuff that you need. And that way, when you make a new encounter map, you don't have to reset this stuff. You just go back to your token page and copy paste it onto your encounter page. It's going to save you a ton of time. And I'm glad that I started doing this based on how the Roll20 modules are set up. It's a great idea and I highly recommend it. So next, we need to make a map so that we can actually use this token. So I created another page here called Map Gridded Start. This is just a blank page, and it works exactly the same way. We need to find a map, and I will say that Roll20 does have its own built-in tools. If you want to go old school and draw a map yourself, you can do that. It's got a drawing tool off to the left here. We've got, freehand. We can draw circles and shapes. We can use polygon, the polygon line tool, and we can click around and, draw our own dungeon this way. I don't find these tools particularly useful. I think the drawing tool is most useful for creating dynamic lighting, or for if you want to, draw an aura in the middle of a combat. This is also probably what you'd use this for. I will also point out before we continue with putting a map on here that there is a way, if let's say you've got a, you put a map out here and you go, this is a good map, but I want to add some assets to it. If we go over to, I believe it is, this second tab here, it's the art library tab. This is going to keep track of everything that you've ever uploaded across your accounts. You can see here that I have, I've created specific folders in this menu here, so that I can come back, and this is going to save it across all your accounts. You can also click this tab called Premium Assets. It'll save everything that you've purchased. This has all my purchases. I've purchased the Frost Maiden campaign, and I purchased the Spelljammer module. I also purchased this set called Spell Tokens, so it's going to save this here as well. The more useful thing, I think, you'll have access to this whether or not you've got a premium account. If you click on Free Assets, this has all sorts of tokens and different thematic things that you can use. You just have to drag them into the thing. Works exactly the same. And now you've got, you've got some new tokens to play around with. But where I was getting at is, let's say you've got a nice wilderness encounter map and you go, well, this is great. I want to add more trees, or I want to add some mountains to it. We can search up here, and let's just search for tree, for example. It will show you the things in your library tagged with tree. It'll show you premium stuff as well that you don't have access to because you have a free account. But if you click this down here, powered from the web, it's going to search the internet and give you a bunch of stuff that's probably usable as tokens for Roll20. It's going to have some stuff that's not quite useful as well. Like this is just a sheet full of trees. Obviously, this is not really useful to us. But stuff like this, This probably is. I'm willing to bet this is also a transparent token as well, which it is. So this stuff's going to be very useful. If you wanted to create something a little more customized or from scratch, you could do that. Let's go back, and I'm going to drag in a map that I have from, I've purchased this map from I think it was an Even Tier Games pack. And so all I got to do is the same thing. Let's drag it in. It's going to take a second. As long as you're using a file that's not terribly big, it should work pretty quickly. If you start getting into some high-res maps, that's where it takes a long time and it might not even work. So you might have to go in and, with a file editor, make sure it's not too big of a file. So let's zoom out. I think this actually might be too big for the page. We want to make sure that it's aligned to the top left to start. And we also have put it on the wrong layer. By default, we're on the token layer. We want this on the map and background layer. It's very easy to move this around. We don't have to delete it, move ourselves over to map and background and put it back on there. If we right click on the thing, and you can do this for tokens as well. We right click on it, go to the layer, sub menu, or whatever you want to call this, and click map layer. Boom, it's on the map layer. But now we got a problem. This map came with a grid on it. The Roll20 app also has a grid, which is mostly usable for functionality. And they don't line up. So how do we do that? We can try to drag this map around and resize it, and hopefully it eventually works. That's a big pain, but fortunately, Roll20 has a built-in tool to make our life really easy. So let's zoom in. Let's find a spot where we can see the map grid nice and clearly. Let's, this looks pretty good. And we'll right-click on the map. We'll go to Advanced and go Align to Grid. It's going to ask us to draw a 3x3 box. This window's kind of in the way. It's going to ask us to draw a box, which is going to tell the app, hey, this is basically what the grid resolution is. And that's why I'm zooming in nice and tight so I can get as close as I can get. And it works pretty well. The caveat is as long as your grid starts in the exact top left. If it doesn't, that's when this tool kind of stops working. And there, as we can see, that worked pretty well. Let's zoom out and get a good look. It's going to resize it automatically. I think now our page is too narrow and far too tall. So we go into the page settings. Let's adjust this a little bit. We need to be wider and shorter. And okay, we're close. We need 3 shorter and 4 wider. It's going to start cutting space from the right and the bottom. So again, as long as we're aligned to the top left, we're good. So let's go back. We need 4 more narrow, and I think it was 3 shorter. And I think that should be good. Now, a lot of times if you've purchased content, you've purchased a map from a third-party publisher, and you're using it, often they make these maps for VTT specifically. They'll often tell you the resolution, so you don't have to guess at it. If you found a map on the internet, you're going to have to go through this process. So we're pretty good here now. And then lastly, the last bit to do is we can still see this gray Roll20 grid a little bit. We don't want to turn it off. That would remove the functionality. But what we want, and here I'll even show you, I'll bring in that token once again to show you. So let's go back. Let's grab the token that we just added in, and let's copy paste it into our newly made map. Now once we drag this around, this should automatically lock in and snap into the grid, which is what we want. But and I'll show you if we turn this grid off in the settings page. If we turn it off, we'll still see the grid that came with the map, but once we move this token around, it no longer snaps to the grid. So we don't want to turn it off. Let's go back and turn this back on. What we want to do is we just turn the opacity down to 0. Now we can't see that. We only see the grid that's on the map, and our token snaps into place because the functionality remains. Now, if for some reason we wanted to move our token or any asset and have it not aligned to a grid, you're probably going to do this if you're putting some benches or something on a map and you don't want it to exactly lock to a grid because that's going to screw up the alignment with the background. All you need to do is drag and hold the Alt key and when you let go, it's not going to snap to the grid anymore. It'll go wherever you put it. But I want this to align to the grid. The other reason you keep the grid on is because of this measurement tool off to the left here. This is useful. We can select this. This is useful for measuring distances. And if the grid is turned on, it will snap to the grid. If it's not going to do that. So we've got our map, we've got our token, and now we're basically ready to run combat with this. This is enough for you to run combat. As long as we've assigned players to this token, it should be pretty much ready to go. Now I want to show an example of if we've got a map that doesn't have a grid. So we'll start here, and I've got another map that I think this also was from the same pack, but just to show you, it's basically the same process. There's just a few less things that we have to do because there's no existing grid on the map. This must be a little bit of a bigger file size. It's taking a little bit longer. Here we go. And we put it again on the wrong layer. So we will right click, move to the map layer. Let's move ourselves over there as well while we're at it. And now since both this does not have an existing grid and we're dealing with wilderness stuff, there's less of a strict need to adhere to some sort of scale. I'm not so concerned with making sure that this is the exact right scale. I'm just going to drag it until it fits and looks good. And I go, well, does this make sense that, you know, a road would be 5 to 10 feet wide? Yeah, that makes sense. I could make it bigger. This is probably good enough. And then I just need to go in here and reduce the page size so it actually fits. You don't want this white space. So I would just need to go in here and mess with the page settings until it looks good. And there we go. And this grid is a little bit dark, so I'll come in here and let's just change the color to, let's try this. And that's probably good. And now our player token, our player character tokens are going to snap to the grid. Everything's going to be nice and dandy. And this is basically ready for combat as well. Now, the last thing that I might use maps for, let's see if I've got a picture ready to go really easily, is since running games online, I definitely have noticed that the less things that you have engaging the senses of your players, the more likely it is that they're going to get distracted. I don't try to reprimand players for that. I just accept it's a thing. And so the more things that I can engage the senses with, visuals, sounds, I'll talk to them by character name. We've got webcams up and running all the time. I try to have, even if we're not in an encounter, I'll have something up for them to look at, whether it's a world map or whether it is some environmental cue to remind them of what the area is in that we're in. I don't know that I've got one ready to go here. I thought I could find one really quickly. Maybe. No, these are all encounter maps. Oh, here we go. This one will work. So let me go down to the map card and let's drag in this picture. I might do this and then put the players on this map. It's not really a map per se. It's just a reminder of the kind of area that we're in, so that it's another thing for them to look at while we're playing games on the internet. So in that case, oh, cool. This is new. Yeah, let's fit it to page. Adjust page to match image size. Yes, why not? And now we've got this beautiful sunrise over some snowy, snowy little field here. But I don't want the grid. I think this is on the correct... Yeah, this is on the correct layer. I just need to go into the page settings and I'll turn off the grid this time. Or I could just remove the opacity. It doesn't really matter in this case because we're not putting tokens on it. But let's just turn the grid off because we're never going to need it for this kind of page. And now I'll just bring the players over to this page and we're doing some role play. We don't need a map. This is just a visual reminder of the kind of area that we're in. And I find, like I said, having more things that can engage the senses the better. Lastly, I want to briefly mention the player journal, and this is this third tab on the right here. What this is useful for is it's for basically for like player handouts, you know, world maps, or I guess you'd probably put a world map on its own page, but secret notes that they find, or anything that you wanted to give to the players later on to remind them, or even what I've done for myself is screenshotted like a chart of common tavern prices. Like here's on the low end, here's what ale costs, and here's kind of middle of the range, and here's high end, and here's what meals cost, here's what an average room costs, because I'm terrible at remembering what the price of stuff is on the fly. So I found it in, I think it was in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I screenshotted it. And then what I can do is I come over to the journal tab, I click add, I will make a handout that's just for me, and I can drag that file in here. Just for example, let's say I had a secret map to give to players. Works the same way. I just drag the file into this place here. Needs to not be a very big file because it's probably not going to work. So there we go. And let's rename this. It's not Mysterious Note. It's Mysterious Map. And we'll save it. And now it's in this folder called Handouts. I can customize, I can make whatever folders I want. I could probably rename this even. Handouts is fine for this example. And I think by default, it does not give it to all players, but I can change the permissions here. I can say, yes, this should be in all players' journals, or no, this should just be in the Dungeon Master's journal. Let's say, I also remember I found a calendar of the Faerunian moon cycles, because that was relevant in my last campaign, and I screenshotted that, and I had it as a journal entry for myself to remind myself. Eventually, that was revealed to all players. So you can go here and manually change the permissions, or a neat trick that you can do is you can force it to appear on their screen by clicking Show to Players, and it will automatically bring this up. Now, how it's going to look is it'll show them this. If we click on it, it's going to pop it up like this. So that is the journal tab, and you can use this for other things as well. I don't typically use the character sheet or the PDF thing. I just use handouts and folders basically. I also use Discord for a lot of this stuff, so it's useful, but it's also not at the same time. But that should do it for this first video. Just to recap, we started by making a token, and we made sure to put that on the correct layer, and we talked about how to navigate in between those, as well as how to move different things over to different layers. In the next video, we're going to talk about, well, maybe we'll get into like the GM info overlay tab as well. We'll get into dynamic lighting in the next video, but we also created a map that starts with a grid on it already. And we talked about how to align the grid to the Roll20 grid and how that works together. We made a map that does not have a grid, and how in this case we kept the Roll20 grid on the display. And then we made a map card, which is not really a map, it's just a visual cue to remind players of the kind of environment that we're in, because we want to engage the senses and keep players paying attention. And then lastly, we just briefly touched on the journal. We also talked about the art library tab and how to search here and go find some stuff that you can add onto your thing. I don't think that the drawing tools, and I don't think it's really a good use of time to try to draw a map from scratch and try to drag in separate assets. I have done it just for the experience, and it's not really a good use of time, but you can certainly do it. So I think that's going to do it for this first video. In the next one, like I said, we're going to talk about dynamic lighting. We'll make the maps look nice and pretty. And in the third video, we will talk about this fun tab over here, the jukebox tab. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.